Welcome to The Fairer Sense.
With me, Tanya.
And me, Kara.
Women, money, and the fight to break even.
Because we give a shit. And you should too. Today's episode, The Economics of Reproduction Part 2. All the costs of giving birth.
Hey, Kara.
Hey, Tanya.
We are back to talk about a subject that I know we are both filled with rage about.
I mean, point out a subject. What am I not filled with rage about?
Now, I can't remember which episode it was in, but there was one episode a long time ago when I confessed to not really washing my face before I would go to sleep at night. And I want everyone to know, including the dermatologist who wrote to us to frantically urge me to wash my face. Thank you. That I have since adopted like a fairly intensive skincare routine. And I was thinking this morning as I was washing my face, I was like, I would love nothing more than to live in a world in which we had nothing to be angry about and we could just talk about skincare routines. But sadly, we don't live in that world.
Oh, also, I would have very little to say on that. My skincare routine is like throw some water on my face and moisturize. And I do have a nighttime moisturizer and a daytime moisturizer, but like I actually don't use cleanser.
I mean, I have no opinion on this. I am definitely now using way too many products just because it's fun and I have time to. Whereas in my working life, I would collapse into bed every night. And so, yeah, I think we could have some pro-con discussions about cleanser, about moisturizer. I think you're adulting pretty darn well if you have morning and evening moisturizers.
Thank you. I think it's very important that the daytime moisturizer have SPF. I'm a big SPF fan. So all of our dermatologists listening, I hope you're proud of me. But you know what? Maybe we will do a skincare episode and it's just like very zen. We don't yell about anything and we just like get people up here to be like, ooh, I double cleanse. I'm like, oh, interesting. Tell us more about that. I follow a Korean, routine or what have you. And that'll be a nice palate cleanser someday.
Once things get a little better in the world, we can do how to do the 10-step Korean skincare routine on a budget. I have a lot to say about this.
I read an article about that semi-recently and was just like, oh God, like thinking about it exhausts me.
That is totally valid, but I also think I'm viewing it as fun and as like a luxury self-care thing because we are not getting any younger. I will say on the SPF point, my recent revelation has been powdered sunscreen, like applied like a powder makeup, which I really appreciate because I have super sensitive skin and can't do any chemicals and zinc is white and kabuki as shit on my skin. So doing the powders has been really good and I don't break out from it. Yay, I can actually use sunscreen.
Maybe we should turn this into the sunscreen episode because I feel so strongly about the power of sunscreen. I am like a true devotee. And I also have 3 tattoos, one of which is very visible and sun degrades tattoos. So it's really important that tattoos be covered in SPF. So I always have it on me. I'm like, oh, gotta have it.
All right. So wear sunscreen. I think that's our initial thesis of today, but not really the topic we're here to talk about. Last time in episode 33, we talked about the economics of reproduction and the choice not to give birth. Today, we're talking in part 2 about the economics of giving birth. If you've been listening a while, you may recall back in season 2, episode 14 was the economics of motherhood. And we talked a lot then about things like the lack of paid maternity leave, especially in the US, and the opportunity costs that a lot of moms face having to provide childcare or the pay that you give up while on maternity leave and how that translates into the whole lifelong wage gap, figures that are really upsetting. We're not going to go too much into that stuff today since we've covered it, but we are going to talk about the literal costs of giving birth and how, frankly, fucked up it is.
There's a lot to cover in this topic, which is why we wanted to break it into 2 sections. But also, even in today's episode, we can't tell everyone's story and share everyone's experience. So please write to us if you respond to this episode. We got a couple of really nice emails where people did share with us, but including one from John.
Probably my favorite thing this season about doing the 2 parts on topics is that we can actually get emails like this before we record the next one and share some of this with you. Listener John, obviously a guy, wrote in, he said, "It's just amazing that in this day and age, women are still penalized for having children. Obviously, lower income women have it worst, but we were also negatively impacted, and my wife was a full partner in her medical practice when we got pregnant. pregnant. First of all, she was allowed 3 months maternity leave according to the operating agreement, but without pay, of course. We could apply for disability, but that is naturally at a significantly reduced amount, and you need to be out of work for over a month before the disability could kick in. Then, on top of that, for every month of her maternity leave, she lost a week of vacation. This was because the operating agreement wanted to discourage the wealthier partners from just taking random months off and messing up scheduling. But the agreement was written by men and didn't have any exception for women partners who might have children. He goes on to say that his wife forced through some changes after all of this happened, but it still had obviously a negative impact on their finances. And I mean, thinking about that, like having to not only go through an unpaid maternity leave, but then when you're gone, you're also giving up vacation time, which you might need to spend with your kid. That's really upsetting. And that's in a medical practice. I think John is exactly right that lower income women have it even worse because they may not be in a position to have a buffer against an unpaid maternity leave, may get forced. We hear of people taking like 2 and 3 weeks off and then going back to work because they have to. I mean, this is the society we live in.
Yeah, in a country that does not have federally mandated parental leave, these are choices that people have to make every day and across every single industry. Maybe you work for a company that offers maternity leave and maybe you don't. And that's the dynamic in the United States. Or even if you do, as John so aptly points out, there can be flaws in the design of the plan. And that's why, as always, we like to talk about this big picture because advocating for change on a systemic level is really what gets everyone to more fair ground. But it's also infuriating. I feel like that's the title of the Fairer Sense book. It's also infuriating, ... that the motherhood penalty really continues down the line throughout careers. So in 2019, a study was released based on US Census data that shows that women experience, and it is specifically women, mothers, experience $16,000 a year in a motherhood penalty, meaning women earn $16,000 less a year when they become mothers. And mothers make an average of 71 cents to their male counterparts, $1. The economics of it, the finances of it, and when we spiral it out a little bit, that's less money for the household, that's less money for the child, that's less money for retirement savings, and these issues compound over 20, 30 years. More women retire into poverty than men, and it ties directly back to things like the motherhood penalty. It is infuriating. It's also just, there's such a clear way to make this better that the United States is continually failing to do, which is obviously mandated maternal and paternal leave, in case no one got that.
Yeah. And, we've talked before, we've referenced studies that show that when you actually give equal maternal and paternal leave, it also negatively impacts women economically because a lot of men when they're home are, like men aren't nursing. And so they're able to get things like work done. And so a lot of people, for example, like male professors, when they're on parental leave, make progress on their academic work where the women are busy taking care of the baby and nursing and doing all of that stuff. And so don't. And so it actually then can advance men's careers while it holds women back. So yay. Today, Kara's bringing all the stats and I'm just bringing the rage in a lovely role reversal. Actually, that's not true because you usually bring stats and rage, which is true today. And today I'm just bringing rage. We've talked also before about emotional labor. We talked about that back in episode 4 of the podcast, back in season 1 and last season in episode 28 about microaggressions. And there's also that part of it too. So the layers of cost to women of giving birth, of having to do more emotional labor in most households of, we've talked before about the crazy low bar for men, like if a man provides childcare, everyone will go, oh, hey, good for you for helping out, as though like it's not also his kid and things like that. So we've got all kinds of layers of things to be filled with rage about. So yeah, the actual cost of birth is just like yet another nail in the coffin.
Right. I mean, all of these costs, all of these social penalties come after a baby comes out of a body. But actually, the cost of getting a baby out of a body is astronomical and a huge issue. Let's just get into that. I talked with an expert in this. I also did an audio essay for y'all today. So let's dig into the numbers of giving birth in the United States.
Let's do it.
I spoke with Carol Sakala, Director of Childbirth Connection Programs at the National Partnership for Women and Families, and I asked her to break down some of the costs associated with birth from start to finish.
We actually have data from a report that we commissioned from Truven Health Analytics, and the value of these data are that they're based on proprietary information of what is actually paid on behalf of moms and babies. The most important thing to understand is that there's costs for the mom and costs for the baby. I think many people just think of the mother's maternity care costs, but the baby, although makes a rather late appearance, is involved with about 36% of the total cost. So we have to consider both parties. And the biggest cost is the facility fee for the mother. So that's in that time when nearly all women in this country go into the hospital to give birth. There's a room and board charge and for other services that they receive from the hospital. The next largest cost is the baby's facility fee. The baby is treated as a new patient when the baby is born and has a lot of charges. Then there's the mother's maternity care provider, and that would include costs, and it could be providers. It would include costs for prenatal care, costs for around the time of birth and in the hospital, and costs for postpartum services. There's baby's pediatric care in the hospital and in the newborn period. Most women have anesthesiology fees, and then there are other smaller amounts that do add up, lab, imaging, and pharmacy costs in the outpatient setting. So all of those add up to quite a lot. And I think it's really important for people to understand that this is spread across 3 phases of care: the prenatal care with office-based services, the care when you go into the hospital and give birth and stay there for some period afterward, and then the postpartum care. But in the United States, $4 out of $5 paid on behalf of the mom and the baby across that whole episode go into the hospital phase of care. So that's really where we need to keep our focus when we think about high costs and possibly avoidable costs. And also that what's really important, you may have heard, Kara, the poor outcomes that we have in the United States with rising maternal mortality, rising severe maternal morbidity, rising low birth weight and preterm birth. So we're not getting much value for those costs, and also just leaving $1 out of $5 spent for all of the care that is provided in offices before birth and after birth is probably a factor in why our outcomes are the way they are.
Have these costs of birth risen over time? And if so, what are some of the factors that go into that? Is it more expensive to have a baby in 2019 than it was in 1970?
The cost of having a baby really is not very different from our medical costs in general. There's inflation year by year, and people are quite concerned that the costs that we pay for healthcare are simply not sustainable. Every year, they consume a larger part of the GDP, and so it's taking a toll in other areas like education, for example. These costs go up every year, and one of the reasons that they go up is that we have a very bizarre system. Unlike other things that we pay for in our society, you typically don't learn how much it cost for the service you got until after you've received it. So there's a lot of leeway for the service providers to be less accountable in that regard. Also, I think it's really important for people to understand that we have what we call a fee-for-service system, which is to say you do something and you get paid for it, and it doesn't matter whether you did the right thing and whether you get a good outcome or not. And in fact, if you get a bad outcome, there's a kind of perverse reward of getting paid to provide more services. So many of us feel that a real priority is to change the way we pay for maternity care and healthcare in general. And that is happening slowly. It's happening more rapidly for conditions that are covered by Medicare, because Medicare is a federal program that's centralized and it's easy to set policy in that way. But Medicaid is where the big policy lever is for the state-based work and conditions such as maternal health and health of children, Medicaid is a 51 jurisdiction program jointly paid for by states and by the government, and that's much harder to impact. But there is work underway to change the way we pay for care and to add an element of accountability and to provide incentives for folks to work together as a team toward shared goals. I have a great confidence that when we make this transition, which would involve a culture shift in how we practice and would provide incentives for people to change the way they practice, we can see some amazing results from innovative leaders who are committed to this kind of improvement.
I mean, it seems like the cost of birth is just a huge burden on families, but more specifically, it seems like a burden that is placed on the individual who's having the baby because they may or may not have a partner or family who's involved. Do you have any insight into how the cost of giving birth can negatively impact the financial health of a person who can give birth? Is there any data to show the cost of birth impacts finances in a long-term capacity?
So I don't have an understanding of the details of the long-term impact, but what I do know is that this comes at a time when women and families are less able to handle it. Their costs are going up for having a new member of the family and new kinds of charges and fees and expenses, including possibly childcare, or foregoing the income, maybe temporarily or for a longer period of time for one of the members of the family if there are two adults. And it is very challenging at this time. And with all these new responsibilities and demands, it's an enormous responsibility to care for a new baby. So this comes at a time when it's very challenging for families to take this on. They're less able to handle it. And also, I should say that we need to think as well about the lack of social supports that we provide as a society and in the workplace for families. Paid family and medical leave, we're one of 2 countries in the world that really doesn't offer paid family and medical leave reliably to women. There's a move afoot to make this happen nationally, and a number of states are providing this and major employers, but it's not reliable and most women don't have it. Also, paid sick days that you might use to go to your prenatal visits, to take care of a sick child, etc. Again, a move afoot to make this available nationally, but not reliably available now. And childcare, many other countries do a much better job of supporting families with childcare. So women are left with a lot of challenges when they have a new baby, and many of them relate to financial issues.
Do you think that we as a country are really kind of de-incentivizing birth because there are so few social safety networks, so little support, because we're really putting everything on the individual family? I've read that the birth rate is going down among educated populations, particularly educated whites in the United States. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think a lot of these issues are becoming more salient with the general public. And I feel that the birth rate is definitely going down over a number of years. Increasingly, fewer babies are born year by year. I think this is a real challenge for families. There are different ideas about whether our economy is booming or not, but definitely it's not booming for people in the gig economy, people who have 2 and 3 jobs, people who have jobs without good benefits. And so people, I think, are thinking twice about having a baby or maybe putting it off. We won't know until more years to come whether some of these births that would have occurred will occur at a later time or not. But yes, I think people are increasingly aware that our society is not very family friendly.
Big thanks to cloud accounting software FreshBooks for sponsoring Season 4 of The Fairer Sense, the 3rd season of the show they've sponsored in its entirety.
We love FreshBooks, both because they've been such a big supporter of The Fairer Sense and because they provide the simplest, easiest to use cloud accounting software out there, which you can try by visiting freshbooks.com/TFC.
If you're a small business owner or freelancer, there are so many things you have to think about, from actually making money to keeping track of it.
FreshBooks takes the work out of getting paid, so you can focus on doing the work you need to do to keep your business running. With FreshBooks, FreshBooks, you can create a customized invoice, track all your income, and link a business credit card to automatically track business spending.
FreshBooks makes it super simple to do your accounting, and it makes accounting one less thing you need to worry about as a business owner, so you can focus instead on crushing the financial patriarchy.
Head to freshbooks.com/TFC to claim your 30-day free trial and enter the fairer cents in the How Did You Hear About Us section. You get to try a great product while supporting us. That's freshbooks.com/TFC. The cost of birth in the United States is like an extreme sport where the rules aren't explained until after you've competed. It is wildly difficult to pin one number onto how much a birth costs in the United States, and that's for several important reasons. The first being, there are two ways to give birth: C-sections and vaginal delivery. A second reason is our long national nightmare in the United States, or our health insurance system. People on different plans or with different insurers will face drastically different costs. A third reason is that everything from race to location to income levels will affect the cost of birth. What we do know is that birth is hella expensive in the United States, far more so than any of our peer nations. In fact, the US is the most expensive country in the world to give birth in. A 2013 study by the advocacy group Childbirth Connection found that on average, hospitals charged $32,093 for an uncomplicated vaginal birth and newborn care, and $51,125 for a standard C-section and newborn care. You can imagine what the costs are for a 2020 birth, given the rate of inflation. While these numbers are shocking, what's even more shocking is how nebulous the process is to find out how much birth costs. You can't simply call a hospital and ask, how much will a birth cost? And we know that because people have tried. In 2016, Vox Media journalist Johnny Harris recorded his experience trying to find out the cost of his wife's impending birth. He tried calling hospitals before his wife gave birth to get an estimation of the costs associated with the birth. Here's how that went.
Your call will be recorded. To ensure we provide you with quality service.
I'm just trying to see if I can get a number.
You will not get a copy of that until after the procedure is done.
Okay. Do you have that information, though, in terms of like how much certain items cost?
No, they will not present the cost until after.
So there's literally no way for me to discover what the cost is until after I buy it. Is that right?
We do not keep that information on hand. Everything is processed after.
Certainly that information exists in your hospital system somewhere.
The itemized copy, all of that information is done after the procedure, not before.
I haven't heard a single number from anyone about how much anything costs. Whew, this is actually starting to become frustrating. Okay.
After 2 weeks, he was able to get a pricing consultant on the phone at one hospital, who quoted him $347 for the birth, but could not explain the details of that cost because she didn't know them. That's right. The pricing consultant didn't know the details on the hospital prices. The actual out-of-pocket cost for their baby's birth, $841, $494 more than the original quote. Hospitals have huge price fluctuations, and in most cases, the consumer doesn't know that. And should a consumer want to find out about the prices or the pricing structure, that information is devilishly hard to find. That same 2013 study from Childbirth Connection does shed some light on some of the costs associated with birth. Buckle up, because this is about to be quite the ride. C-sections have 50% higher costs than vaginal births. 1 in 3 births in the United States are C-sections. Private insurance, like that from an employer, covers about half of the births in the United States. 43% of all U.S. births are paid for by Medicaid. The average payment made by commercial insurance companies on behalf of people giving birth and babies is $20,000. That number changes to $18,000 for vaginal births and $28,000 for C-sections. The average cost of a birth by someone who has Medicaid is $10,000. For a vaginal birth, that number changes to $9,000. And for a C-section, it changes to $14,000.
If you are served by an out-of-network doctor, you will be charged more. Women with private insurance estimated that they paid $3,400 out of pocket to give birth. Women with Medicaid insurance estimated that they paid $1,000 out of pocket. Quick reminder here, y'all. Since these numbers are from a 2013 study, they should all be considered low due to inflation. Now you may be asking, hey Kara, why don't we have a more updated study with more updated numbers? And the answer is, there is not a lot of funding for this type of research. Isn't that interesting? Birth is complicated, but there's really no need for it to be as expensive as it is in the United States. And when you consider that prenatal care and birth are just the beginning costs of raising a whole new person, the cost becomes all the more shocking. There's still soccer and clothing and birthday parties and food to pay for this whole new life you've created. In 2017, the USDA estimated that it costs a middle-income married couple of a child born in 2015 $284,570 to raise a child through age 17. This does not include birth. Branching out of hospital births, people do have the option of a home birth. Home births, though, can vary just as much as hospital birth does. Some insurance companies cover them and some don't. What state you live in matters a lot. And with a home birth, there is still the chance that you will be transferred to a hospital to complete the birth, thus incurring hospital costs. In the United States, approximately 35,000 births per year occur in the home. That is less than 1% of all the births in the United States. The main cost associated with home births is hiring a midwife, which, as you probably guessed by now, can vary wildly. For example, in the San Francisco Bay Area, midwives charge between $4,000 and $8,000, according to an NPR report. I tried to find information on the cost of midwives in Missouri and Iowa to compare with those California costs, and I met a wall. None of the midwives I found online listed their prices on their websites. And when I called, I was told I couldn't be given an exact price because some insurance companies work with them and some don't. It would totally depend on who my insurer was. Once again, the cost of birth remains nebulous and exhausting to track down. Finally, there is the role of a doula to consider. A doula is a sort of birth advocate and support provider who can be present at a hospital or home birth. A doula is trained to provide support throughout labor and delivery, and often makes a few follow-up calls after birth to check on breastfeeding and post-birth needs. Studies have shown that doulas can help reduce time spent in labor, can reduce anxiety for the person giving birth, can act as an advocate for people when it comes to medical decisions and interventions, and can improve mother-baby bonding after the birth. All of this is according to whattoexpect.com. But doulas come with an additional cost. Few health insurance programs cover them, and an average doula cost can range from $400 to $1,200. To say that the cost of birth is complicated and high in the United States would be the understatement of the year. I'm exhausted from just doing the research. So to all of the people giving birth in the United States, I wish you an affordable and easy to navigate birth experience. A lot of stats in there that are real upsetting, which, I mean, at this point shouldn't be a surprise. But what is, I think, additionally frustrating, and you touched on this in your piece, the idea that in some ways there's no way to opt out of these costs, even though for, millennia, millions of years, I don't know. Since the dawn of time, people have been delivering babies at home, not in hospitals. And of course, modern medicine and medical intervention has saved countless lives. And for sure, maternal mortality, infant mortality, these things have all gone down as we've improved our medical system. But it's still true that for a lot of women, it would be perfectly safe to have a home birth. And we completely write that off as a possibility, even though it would be far, far cheaper, which is probably, to be honest, a big part of why we write it off.
Yeah, it's really interesting doing this episode and learning all of these numbers and statistics and frankly, the experiences of some people who give birth. It really made me check my own thoughts about birth, because I definitely in my adulthood have judged home births. It sounds like something a hippie would do. It sounds like something a bad parent would do, because since you're not in a hospital, it feels like you're more inherently at risk. But that's not actually what the data shows at all. So it is just this kind of insidious marketing of, well, you have to go to a hospital, you have to have a doctor, you have to have all these things. But it's like, let's zoom back out for a second and say, no, to your point, people have done this forever, literally forever, since there were people.
Forever.
And let's change the way that we're talking about birth and what is a good birth or the right birth or what have you.
Yeah. Thank you to listener Kelly, who wrote in to talk about exactly this topic. And she said, America has a history of pushing out and demonizing midwives and creating fear surrounding birth. Home birth and community birth costs less than any hospital birth, yet insurance rarely covers it. Statistics show that planned home birth for low-risk women is as safe or safer than hospital birth, yet it is demonized as risky and unsafe. I think, Kara, to your point, that's exactly what you said, that like we have this set of ideas about what home birth is. And for a lot of people, we've got to get over that. And I think that that's not by accident. That's an idea that's been planted by the medical establishment, which I will also say a medical establishment that isn't necessarily on this particular topic doing a very good job. The US has the highest maternal mortality rate of any of the wealthy nations. And it's because we have a very infant-focused birth procedure. The state of California in the last few years decided to take on this issue of maternal mortality, and they specifically looked at hemorrhaging and decided to do a statewide effort to reduce deaths from hemorrhaging and to do protocols where you weigh the amount of blood that's coming out on sponges and you figure out, and you can kind of act on hemorrhaging sooner, which then improves the mother's chance of surviving. And they've made tremendous strides. And that's just like this simple idea of like, maybe we should actually treat the mom as the patient and not solely the baby. We're spending the most on birth as people giving birth. And then in addition, we have the worst outcomes. Like, how can those things go together in a rational way? But we do not have a rational medical system, unfortunately, particularly when it comes to care for women, people of color, and other marginalized people.
The statistics on women of color dying as they give birth are heartbreaking. Black women in particular are 3 times as likely as white women to die in childbirth. And like we talked about in our last episode, all this really comes down to we live in a country that does not value women's lives. That's really clear in our legislation, in our behavior. It's also really clear in our medicine. And when it comes to facts, like we need people to have babies to continue humans. That's a fact, right? And also in terms of economics, in terms of running a country, we need people to have babies to continue the United States. And we are making it so difficult. We are making it a literally life or death choice. We are also making it so that many people start their child's life in debt. They owe hospitals, they owe care providers. And now this is a rat race that they can't necessarily get out of, depending on who they are. And that's something that I find just really disheartening. And as someone who does not have children and truly does not want them, I also just think we are de-incentivizing people from having kids. I mean, if I did want kids and I looked at the fact that it could cost me $32,000 just to give birth, and then it's going to cost me an additional $285,000 to raise that kid, it's like, oh my God, I work for myself. Where is that money coming from?
Yeah. No one goes into medicine because they don't give a shit about women. Like, of course, especially doctors who deliver babies are focused on women's care. They care. The problem is not that the doctors don't give a shit or don't value women. It's that we have a system that doesn't actually teach people to recognize how things look in different bodies. It's why we know that women have a much higher likelihood of dying of heart attacks than men, because the whole pain in the left arm and chest pain and the stuff, it's not necessarily going to manifest the same for women. And so when women go in with indigestion, they don't necessarily look at, oh, maybe you're having a heart attack, even though that could very well be what it is. I'm sure that it is similar for women of color, that either there are perceptions that they're tougher. I mean, some of this stuff goes back to slavery days when slavery owners argued that Black people have thicker skin and feel less pain, and therefore you have to whip them. I mean, crazy shit that I do think there are tiny bits of that have carried forward in terms of pain tolerance and ignoring people's pain. But like, for example, I recently learned that the condition that I have that I've talked about before, Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, one of the symptoms of it that's always listed is translucent skin. Well, cool, but that sounds like something that's only observable on white skin, not necessarily brown skin or black skin. And thinking about like how many people of color are not getting diagnosed with what I have because the textbooks are based on a white-centric point of view with this. There are certainly things like that that apply to women giving birth and women in labor, women getting their prenatal care, where things are not happening as they should. And so we are paying the price for it, both in terms of money and in terms of our lives.
I really wanted to get a doula on this episode because that was another thing that I thought was just for kind of like hippie crunchy people and frankly like rich people to hire a doula. But the more I've researched this topic, the more I realize that doulas actually play such a critical role in protecting the health of the mother throughout the pregnancy and during birth, because doulas can advocate and say, actually, we don't want to do that. Actually, we've done our research and here's what works best for people like us, et cetera, et cetera. And doulas really play this really amazing role in making the birth less infant focused and more mother focused, mother and infant. It gets to be this more like tied in cohesive thing. And so I just want to shout out doulas everywhere and say, thank you for doing the work you're doing. And when we talk about reproductive justice and when we talk about reproductive care, it really is, yes, there are amazing individuals who are entering fields because they care, but as a system, we are really broken. And introducing new things to this system, such as new terms of education and new ways of looking at old standards and saying, hey, let's just chickadee check this and make sure that it is applicable to this person, to this day and age. And also understanding that different types of expertise are okay to have in the same room. I don't just need a doctor that went to Harvard. I also need a doula. I also need a water home birth expert. I need someone who is going to be there and understands what I want and can speak to me and speak to the other people in the room in languages that advocate for and protect me as I'm going through this insane moment of getting a human out of my body. I mean, also shout out to everyone who has given birth. It blows my mind. It blows my mind.
I'm so glad that you tied it back to reproductive justice, because I think that that's really true. When we say reproductive justice, I think people tend to just think abortion, and it's really so much more than that. It's being able to be in control of your own life and your own body. And there's so much about the birth process in the US where women don't have control. I know this is something that especially our listeners in big cities will relate to. I lived in LA for a long time. And so, of course, a lot of my friends are in LA and have given birth there. And in LA, because it does tend to be like a bunch of crunchy, organic loving, rich white ladies, the hospitals that serve those populations are really, really obsessed with their C-section rates and with keeping the C-section rates low, because that's something that a lot of people ask about. A lot of people don't want to be rushed into a C-section, which is something that happens in a lot of places also. But the flip side is like the LA hospitals then tend to put C-section off until the last minute. Like a dear friend of mine was forced to be in the hospital, was induced, was not progressing, had to be there for 3 days before they would finally do a C-section, even though the baby was too big for her to have delivered in the first place. And in the course of those 3 days, she got a horrible infection. They subjected her to all this pain. I think as a person who's never given birth, I didn't understand that having your cervical dilation checked is like a really painful, invasive thing, which of course makes sense once you think about it. I just never knew that. But they're doing that multiple times a day over the course of multiple days. And it's this horrible experience. And the hospital was basically in control, and they're waking them up every few hours and not letting her sleep. So by the time the C-section happens and the baby comes, she's totally exhausted. And that's only one story, but I've heard multiples like that of women who were put just through horrendous stuff because the hospital feels like once you're here, we're in charge. We've got to be able to see that there is something wrong with that system, besides just the fact that it costs a huge, huge amount to actually go through that. But again, to pay for it at these high, high rates, to get bad outcomes and to be treated like crap in many parts of the process, which I'm sure lots of people listening have had totally lovely birth experiences. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about a lot of the bad stuff that also happens. It seems so fundamentally wrong, and we need reproductive justice on this side of things too.
Basically, what we're saying is birth costs a lot in the United States, both in terms of dollars and also in terms of opportunities lost, and frankly, in terms of the emotional cost of having a baby. There's a lot that goes into it, and it's definitely something to do a lot of research on and to also understand as best you can about what it is like to give birth in your state and in your health insurance plan. The more you can drill down on your specific situation, the more comfortable you'll feel and the better experience you'll have, and hopefully the less it will cost. Knowledge is always power. And I really want to encourage everyone who is considering giving birth, or someone who is listening whose partner may be giving birth, to really try and own this process as much as possible.
Amen.
Well, after all of that, if you have something you want to say to us, we are always available. You can find us everywhere on the internet. We are at Fairer Sense on Instagram and Twitter. And you can leave a comment on our website, which is thefairersense.com. And of course, fairersense@gmail.com is where you can get in our inbox.
We always love hearing from you, and we're going to try to read more listener notes moving forward. So we'd really love to share your experience with listeners. Of course, in a few weeks after the new year, we will be back with a new topic, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts on that too. But if you've enjoyed this one or you've enjoyed any of our podcasts, we'd love if you'd leave a review in Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcasting app. You can just tap the stars or write something lovely. A fun fact is I went through our reviews on Apple Podcasts, and every single one-star review, which, are just the people who listen and are like, oh, you suck, mentions the phrase identity politics.
Oh my God, really?
Which I feel like says more about those people than it does about us. Because, if being in a female body is political, then yeah, I guess we're freaking political.
Oh my God. Also, the phrase identity politics is such freaking nonsense. Like, what a stupid, frankly, what is it? Like a dog whistle to other shitty people to be like, "Meh, I'm an asshole."
Oh,
that's what I think.
It's fully dog whistle, because it's also like the people who say identity politics are playing identity politics. So it's a silencing technique. And usually those people also complain about our voices and all kinds of other things. One person complained about the music, which I'm sorry, but that's just bullshit. Breakmaster Cylinder is amazing. And yeah.
Well, feel free to leave a shitty review if you want, but if you want to leave a nice review, that'd be even better for us. We are strong in who we are and what this show is about. So,
and in general, if you're thinking about leaving a bad review, that's cool. Please do that if it makes you feel better. But some life advice from me to you: don't hate listen to stuff. Life is too short. Listen to stuff you enjoy. Don't hate read things. Don't hate listen to things. Don't hate watch stuff. If you hate something, move on. Find something else. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, agreed. Life is too short. YOLO, baby. No time for hate watching.
No time. It's later than you think.
Ooh, that one got me. I was like, oh shit, it is later than I think.
Because I watched Wine Country on Netflix last night, and that is a quote from the tarot card reader in there. I highly recommend. It's a good watch.
Timon and I watched it. We thought it was like a 4 out of 10.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I would not say every joke landed. Also, Kara, this is probably a moment of me being older than you. And relating to the older lady jokes.
Amazing. It was go watch Wine Country and stay rad, everybody.
Stay rad. The Fairer Sense are Kara Perez and me, Tanya Hester. Editing by me. Our theme song is by The Insider, and all other music is courtesy of the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. You can always find me at ournextlife.com and Kara at bravelygo.co. Don't hate read. Oh, sorry, dog barking. Ollie, shut up.